Twin brothers vanished in 2006. Nearly 2 decades later, one was found wandering a highway, barefoot, silent, wearing the other's watch. Tariq and Malik Rivers, 14, walked out after a birthday party. They said they were heading to the corner store. A gray van pulled up. Tariq leaned in. Malik hesitated. Moments later, they were gone. No signs of struggle, no suspects, and for years, no one believed they'd ever come back. The winter wind howled through the barren streets of St. Clair, Louisiana, a small town clinging to the edge of the bayou like a faded photograph pinned to time. It was February 18, 2006, the kind of day where frost painted silver on the windows and the air smelled faintly of wood smoke and birthday cake. For the Rivers family, it was a special day, the 14th birthday of the twin boys, Tariq and Malik. Inside their Aunt Naomi's modest home at the edge of Magnolia Street, the living room glowed with warmth and noise. Streamers sagged above the windows. Happy 14th, balloons bobbed from the corners of furniture, and the smell of gumbo and store-bought vanilla cake filled the space. Tari, always the more adventurous of the two, was easy to spot, even in a room full of teenage energy. He had a wild grin and a sparkle in his eye that didn't quite match Malik's softer, more watchful demeanor. Malik stood close to their mother, Sandra, keeping half an eye on his brother while avoiding eye contact with the crowd of neighborhood kids and relatives who had stopped by. Their father wasn't present. He hadn't been for years, but no one spoke of Elijah Grant anymore, not after the incident. As the afternoon turned into evening, the laughter faded into murmurs, and one by one, guests filtered out into the cold. The sun began its slow descent behind the pine trees, casting long shadows across the front lawn, painting the house in gold and gray. Sandra had gone into the kitchen to help Naomi with dishes, and Tariq had already slipped on his hoodie, that bright orange one with the frayed sleeves, saying he wanted to grab something from the store down the block. It was Malik who stopped him. "Wait," he said, pulling at his brother's arm. "You can't just go out alone." "You promised." Tariq rolled his eyes. "I'm just going to the corner gas station. 5 minutes. Then I'm going too." Their argument wasn't loud, wasn't heated. It was the kind of quiet back and forth only brothers understood. Finally, Malik relented. But as they walked down the driveway, security footage from a neighbor's porch cam, one that wouldn't be checked until it was too late, caught everything. A gray panel van rolled slowly down the street, headlights off despite the dimming light. It paused near the curb just as Tariq and Malik reached the sidewalk. The passenger window lowered. Tariq leaned in, hands in his pockets, the hood of his sweatshirt casting a shadow over his eyes. Malik hesitated. He stepped back, then Tariq nodded, and before anyone knew it, he opened the back door of the van, 1 foot inside. He looked over his shoulder. Malik shook his head. But then the figure inside reached out and in a second too quick to process, pulled Malik forward. The van door slammed shut and the vehicle slid into the darkness like a shadow returning to its master. No one noticed until it was too late. Sancha called for them at dinner. Aunt Naomi checked the porch, then the backyard. Hours passed before panic turned into police reports. The officer who arrived took notes like he was checking off a grocery list, nodding politely but unconvinced. "You said they left together? Could they have gone to a friend's house?" Sandra snapped. "They were supposed to be back in 15 minutes. It's been 2 hours. Still, no Amber Alert went out." "Not yet," the deputy said. "They're 14. Maybe they're blowing off steam." The next morning, a flyer with their photos, school portraits in identical navy polos, was pinned to the community board outside the gas station. A woman who'd seen them just before sunset said she remembered Tariq's hoodie. "Smiled at me," she whispered. But the other boy, he looked scared. It wasn't until local reporter Theo Crenshaw got hold of the porch cam footage that things took a darker turn. The community split. Some claimed Tariq orchestrated the whole thing, that he lured Malik into something dangerous. Others believed both boys were tricked, taken. The truth? No one knew. All that remained was the ghost of that birthday evening and the silence that followed it. Aunt Naomi never touched the cake again. It stayed in the fridge for 2 weeks until mold crept into the frosting like time-erasing memories. Sandra kept both boys' rooms untouched. The local school left their names on the roster, hoping they'd walk back in one day like nothing ever happened. But the van had vanished. The driver, unseen. License plate, smudged by glare. No fingerprints, no leads. The birthday that was supposed to mark another year of growing up became the day everything stopped. Tariq and Malik had stepped into a mystery no one could solve, and in a town like St. Clair, memories fade quickly when there are no answers to anchor them. But one thing lingered, Malik's last recorded moment. A slight turn of the head, hesitation, and a tug, a gesture of resistance. Proof, perhaps, that something wasn't right, that he hadn't meant to go, that someone else had chosen for him. The night stretched long and cruel for Sandra Rivers. Her mind flickered like a faulty light bulb between denial and dread. Every creak of the house sounded like footsteps returning, every car that passed the window drawing her eyes in desperate hope, but no Tariq, no Malik, in silence. Aunt Naomi, normally the fortress of the family, stood motionless in the kitchen, washing dishes that had already been cleaned 3 times. Her movements were mechanical, her thoughts visibly elsewhere. At one point she asked aloud if anyone had checked the backyard again, even though it had been combed over an hour ago. Sandra didn't respond. Her fingers trembled as they dialed again the same number she'd already tried. Neighbors, friends, Malik's soccer coach, Tariq's piano instructor, but all reported the same. They hadn't seen them. Not today, not since the party. Around midnight, Sandra finally reached Marcus, her husband, the boy's stepfather, who had left earlier that day on a work trip in Baton Rouge. "They never came home," she whispered into the phone, the words thick in her throat like syrup. Marcus, groggy and confused, hesitated before responding. "What do you mean? It's not their weekend with Elijah," Sandra blinked, confused. "What are you talking about? Elijah hasn't seen them in years." "No," Marcus replied. "I mean, they're not with their dad today? It's not the 25th? Sandra's heart dropped. "It's the 18th, Marcus, their birthday. You were here yesterday. You gave them their gift." A long pause, then a soft curse. "Jesus, I thought we were still a week out. I must have put it wrong in the calendar. I told the receptionist I was unavailable for pickups this weekend because they'd be out of town with Elijah." Sandra's voice rose, uncharacteristically sharp. "You told the school they were with their father? Today?" Yeah, I did. They asked me to confirm early last week. I had it wrong, I swear." That mistake, that small clerical slip, rippled through the timeline like a bullet through water. At St. Clair Middle School, a secretary had dutifully marked both Tariq and Malik as excuse absence, parental notification, in the system. No flags were raised when they didn't show up for classes on Monday either. The teachers assumed the twins were on some late birthday trip. By the time the error was noticed, it was already Wednesday morning. Sandra, meanwhile, had returned to the police station early the next day, face pale, hands gripping a manila envelope of photos. But the officer at the front desk, a different one this time, pulled up their report and frowned. "Ma'am, it says here that their father arranged for travel." Sandra's lips parted. "That's not true. I never agreed to that. Elijah hasn't seen them in years. Ask anyone. That's a mistake, but the database didn't care. The system had its boxes checked, its confirmations filed. The machine said there was no emergency." "We'll still file it officially," the officer said gently, "but this may delay the Amber Alert. We'll need clarification from the school and both legal guardians." Sandra left the station in a haze, heart hammering with the weight of that single, dreadful word, delay. That day she drove to the school herself, demanding to see Principal Weatherby. The front office was polite but unprepared for the storm that entered in heels and heartbreak. She showed them the last photo of the twins, snapped at the party, Tariq's arms slung around Malik half smiling, eyes cast downward. When the school secretary, Miss Grubbs, checked the system, her brow furrowed. "That's strange," said Grubbs. "Stair profiles were updated on the 17th. Parental note received. Request to excuse both students for 5 school days." "From who?" Sandra's voice cracked like dry leaves. "From the father, Elijah Grant, or someone who signed that name." Sandra leaned in. "Do you have a copy of the note?" Miss Grubbs nodded and retrieved a printed sheet. Sandra stared at the signature. It looked close enough to pass. But she knew it wasn't real. Even worse, the boys' student files had been accessed remotely from a staff login late on the 17th. Changes were subtle but meaningful. New phone number, new emergency contact. Sandra recognized nowhere. The IT department flagged the login, but the trail ended at a public Wi-Fi connection downtown. Whoever had done it knew what they were doing. The silence deepened. Local news stations ignored the story. Too few facts, no confirmed abduction, just two teenage boys who might have run away. The narrative shifted before it even began. The police told Sandra to stay hopeful. Sometimes they come back, they said. Boys their age, they act out. They go off with friends. But Sandra knew her sons. Malik didn't go off with anyone. Tariq might have tried something bold, sure, but he wouldn't vanish without saying goodbye. Not on their birthday. Not like that. Naomi stayed up each night with Sandra, waiting by the front door. Marcus returned home the next weekend, visibly ashamed, offering apologies that felt like paper in the rain. The guilt hung over him like a smell. Sandra barely spoke to him. She spent her days driving circles through every corner of St. Clair, pinning flyers to grocery store corkboards, asking gas station clerks if they'd seen two boys, one with a scar over his left eyebrow, the other who always wore an old yellow watch. She didn't sleep. She barely ate. Her skin dulled. Her voice shrank. At night she read their favorite books aloud to empty rooms. On the 6th day she returned to the station again, this time with a reporter in tow, Theo Crenshaw, a young local writer who had taken an interest in the story after reading a community blog post Naomi wrote. He brought a camera, asked for a quote. Sandra obliged, her voice steady now, her grief polished into steel. They didn't run away. Someone took them, and someone helped that person hide it. Theo published the story online that night. It got a few dozen shares, enough to make a whisper, but not yet a scream, not enough to find the van. Not enough to find. It had been nearly 2 weeks since the disappearance, and the town of St. Clair had begun to move on in the way small towns always do, quietly, awkwardly, as if grieving too long might be contagious. The flyers Sandra posted had begun to yellow and peel from the utility poles. The gas station clerk no longer looked up when she came in. The police had stopped returning her daily calls. Even the neighbors who once offered casseroles now simply nodded, avoiding her eyes. But Sandra refused to let the silence win. She sat at the edge of her son's shared bed each night, whispering their names as if they might echo back. Naomi worried. Marcus retreated into long hours at work, offering financial support but little else. The only one still calling regularly was Theo Crenshaw, whose blog post had gained modest traction and caught the attention of someone neither Sandra nor the authorities expected to hear from again, Elijah Grant. It started with a voicemail. The voice was older, gravelly, uncertain. "Sandra, it's Elijah. I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but I saw the article. I saw their faces. I think I know something." Sandra dropped the phone mid. She hadn't spoken to Elijah in 8 years, not since he disappeared without warning or reason, abandoning both his sons and the life they had built together. The rage she'd buried reignited instantly, but so did something else. Curiosity. Hope, perhaps, or fear of what he might say. She met him 2 days later in a church parking lot outside Baton Rouge, far enough from St. Clair that no one would ask questions. He looked different, leaner, older, eyes shadowed with exhaustion and something like guilt. He wore a dark cap pulled low and kept glancing around as if being followed. "You look like hell," Sandra said flatly. Elijah didn't argue. He reached into his coat and pulled out a thick manila folder. "Because I've been there," he said, "and now I think that's where our boys are." He told her everything in a hushed voice. How years ago he stumbled across a message board hidden deep in the corners of the web, one filled with symbols, strange schedules, and photos of children who never appeared in any official missing person reports. How one username kept popping up across states tied to old church registries, abandoned youth camps, and rental trucks under fake business names. The username was Harvest44. "I followed it," Elijah said, "through states, through aliases. I got close, too close. I had to disappear, or I'd vanish like them. I didn't leave because I wanted to. I left because someone was watching." Sandra didn't want to believe him. Part of her still saw the man who walked away from 2 5-year-old boys. But another part, the mother, who now stared at 2 empty beds each night, leaned forward. "Why now?" she asked. Elijah swallowed hard. "Because I saw that drawing in the background of the article. The one you gave Theo. The cake photo. I saw the shape in the corner. The T+M symbol. That's what they call their mark. Every child they initiate gets a pair name. Tariq and Malik, T+M. It wasn't just your birthday cake. It was a warning. Sandra's blood turned to ice. She demanded to see proof. Elijah handed over photos. Grainy shots of graffiti under freeway bridges. Carvings in tree trunks at an abandoned summer camp in Missouri. A torn flyer from a youth retreat in Arkansas. All bore the same crude insignia, T+M, C+L, R+J. Always children, always vanished. Meanwhile, miles away in the city archives of St. Clair, an underpaid security analyst named Carson Hayes sat hunched over a pile of old footage logs. He was new to the job, hired only 3 weeks ago, but had been assigned a backlog project digitizing old analog security files from outdated city cameras before the department purged them. Carson was slow, meticulous, and more curious than most. That afternoon, while scrubbing through a copy of the porch cam footage from Magnolia Street, footage Theo had used in his story, he noticed something strange. Not in the foreground, where the boys entered the gray van, but in the shadowy rear window of the vehicle itself. A faint smear of something white on the interior glass. He paused, zoomed, enhanced. There, just above the rear headrest on the left side, someone had scrawled a shape into the dust on the glass. Not a word, not a face, just a crude symbol, the letter T joined with the letter M by a looping ampersand. Carson stared at it for a long moment, heart picking up speed. He checked the metadata. No tampering. This was original city footage, and it had never been reviewed in detail. He flagged it, sent it up the chain. No one responded. Frustrated, he printed a still frame and taped it above his desk, determined to look into it himself later. That night, he searched online for missing children cases marked by similar symbols. After several false leads, one blog caught his eye, Theo Crenshaw's. The article about the missing twins. Carson emailed Theo the image. He received a reply 15 minutes later. "Where did you get this?" That small ripple would eventually turn tidal. But for now, Sandra returned from Baton Rouge with Elijah's folder clutched in her arms and 100 new questions in her head. She hadn't told Marcus. She hadn't told the police. She didn't trust anyone yet. Only Naomi knew Elijah had returned. "He says he's been tracking them," Sandra told her. "For years. He has files, names, photos, things that don't make sense but feel too close to ignore." Naomi nodded slowly. "Then maybe it's time someone started listening to the things that don't make sense." Back in Baton Rouge, Elijah checked into a different motel under another false name. He spread out his notes on the bed, tracing red string across maps and faces. He wasn't sure how close he was, but he knew something now he hadn't dared admit before. Some had resurfaced. Some bore marks, and some, 2 weeks after Elijah's reappearance, Sandra found herself staring at the faded photograph of the symbol scrawled inside the van's window. The same T+M that had haunted her dreams for days. She couldn't unsee it now. The curve of the loop, the slightly slanted cross on the T drawing, not just a mark, it was a signature. Proof. Theo had printed a clearer version of the image and brought it over one evening, laying it out on the dining table while Naomi made tea in the background. "This is the first break we've had that wasn't hearsay," he said, tapping the photo with the eraser end of his pencil. "Carson's pretty sure it was drawn from the inside. That means one of the boys, likely Malik, had enough time to leave a message." The photo had already made its way onto an underground message board dedicated to unsolved child disappearances. Theo, unsure whether to trust the law enforcement agencies that had let them down before, chose instead to crowdsource. It was risky, but someone replied within 12 hours. The username was simply MossGirl79. She wrote only 3 sentences. "I know that mark. I saw it every night for 3 years, and I know who Malik is." Theo forwarded the message to Sandra immediately, and within hours they were on the road to Houston, where the message had originated. The address led them to a migrant aid center in East Houston, a small brick building nestled between an auto shop and a pawn store. Inside they found a woman in her mid-30s with sunken eyes and a nervous twitch in her hands. She refused to give a full name, but answered to Gwen. She looked over her shoulder constantly and flinched at the sound of loud footsteps. But when Sandra entered the room, Gwen froze. Her gaze sharpened. "You're his mama," she whispered. "The one with the yellow watch." Sandra didn't cry, not immediately. She stepped closer, every breath stiff with tension. "You said you knew my son, Malik. What do you know?" Gwen reached into the threadbare satchel slung across her chest and pulled out a tiny velvet pouch, frayed at the edges. From it she produced a tarnished chain holding a pendant, 2 letters carved into a heart-shaped piece of metal. "Plus M," Plus said softly. "He dropped it once. I hid it in my shoe so the man wouldn't take it." Sandra's hand shook as she touched it. She hadn't seen that necklace since Malik was 9. It had been a birthday gift from Tariq, his first handmade present. According to Gwen, she had been held in a compound north of El Paso for nearly 3 years after being picked up by a religious rescue mission while fleeing an abusive home in Arizona. The mission turned out to be a front for what she now called the program. They'd taken her ID, cut her off from the outside world, and assigned her a role, kitchen duty, mostly, but she often saw the children, always in pairs, always silent. The boys, they were together for a while, Gwen recalled. Then they weren't. After the older one tried to run, they split them up. Sandra clenched her jaw. "The older one? Tariq?" Gwen nodded slowly. "He was the louder one, braver, always watching the doors." Meanwhile, Theo had begun tracing the symbol deeper into other databases. One particular forum post caught his eye, a blog run by an art therapist in northern New Mexico, detailing strange, repetitive symbols found in children's drawings at a Catholic orphanage called Santa Esperanza. The drawings had been dismissed as trauma patterns, but Theo recognized the brushstrokes, the way the T and M looped. It was too specific to be coincidence. He reached out, posing as a journalist researching religious influence on child art therapy. Within 2 days, he was granted access to a scanned portfolio of 43 drawings made by children between 2004 and 2009. Sandra, Naomi, and Elijah gathered around the computer screen in Naomi's living room. Drawing after drawing, some done in crayon, others in charcoal, revealed variations of the same motif. 2 letters, always together, sometimes inside a house, sometimes carved on trees. In one particularly chilling piece, the letters were drawn above 2 stick figures, one of which had a red X over its head. "That's him," Elijah said quietly. "That's Tariq," Sandra swallowed hard, refusing to look away. "Or that's what they want us to think." They printed the drawings, compared them to samples of Malik and Tariq's childhood sketches. Tariq had always preferred precise angles and bold lines, Math used softer, rounded forms. The match was undeniable. Elijah pointed to the shading around the figures in one drawing. "See that? That's how Tariq used to shade trees, diagonal lines only. He said cross-hatching looked too messy." "This is his." They sent a few samples to Carson, who now worked overtime in the city archives and had begun his own quiet investigation. He confirmed what they already suspected. The symbol had been reported in at least 6 missing persons cases across 3 states, but no law enforcement agency had ever linked them. Back in Houston, Gwen grew more agitated. "Moved the kids every few months. I heard them talk about a place in Colorado, Cedar Lanterns, they called it. I think it was another camp, maybe even a church. The man, the one with the burned hand, said something about fire and purity. Said the ones who talked too much would go to the dark house." Sandra scribbled down every word, her grip tightening on the pen. "Can you describe him, the burned hand?" Gwen's face paled. "White guy, maybe 45, thin, always wore gloves, even in summer, but once I saw his hand, red, shiny, like melted wax." Tio posted Gwen's sketch online. Within hours, a man in Albuquerque commented that he recognized the description, claimed his sister had dated a man with a similar injury who disappeared after being questioned in a separate case in 2001. His name, Raymond Pike, the same name Elijah had circled in his folder weeks before. Sandra felt the pieces closing in. A line now connected Houston to El Paso to New Mexico, and perhaps beyond. The thread was no longer frayed. It was tightening, dragging something dark and hidden into view. And deep in the center of it all sat a name Sandra couldn't say without her chest clenching. Cedar lanterns. The name Raymond Pike stirred something familiar in Sandra's memory, but it wasn't until Theo cross-referenced to Daniel aliases in Elijah's files with old-school volunteer logs that a different, more immediate connection surfaced, one much closer to home. Among the names on the visitor logs from Tariq and Malik's middle school was Michael Pierce, listed as a music enrichment coordinator who volunteered twice a month to run after-school piano and workshops. At first, it seemed like a coincidence. After all, Sandra remembered Pierce. He had been kind, well-spoken, wore those tweed jackets with elbow patches, and always brought fruit snacks for the kids. But when Theo ran a search through public court records, the pattern sharpened. A man named Michael Raymond Pierce had once been investigated in Oregon under suspicion of improperly obtaining temporary guardianship over a minor who later went missing, an investigation that went cold due to lack of evidence. The last known address on the file? Baton Rouge. Sandra sat in stunned silence at the dining room table, the weight of her own trust pressing down like bricks. "He was here," she said quietly. "He was in my house. He tuned Tariq's keyboard. He said it was his favorite brand, Yamaha weighted keys. I let him take Malik home one time when I had to work late. Jesus Christ, Her voice cracked mid-sentence. Naomi placed a trembling hand over hers, trying to steady the shaking. Had no way of knowing. But Sandra's mind reeled back to the evening that still haunted her, the twins' 13th birthday, when Pierce had stayed longer than anyone else helping Malik write a melody as a surprise gift for Tariq. He had left late, saying something about nurturing natural talent. When they dug deeper into Pierce's background, more details emerged like rot beneath fresh paint. His resume had been printed on faux letterhead, his references unreachable or expired numbers. The organization he claimed to work for, the Rivers Institute for Youth Talent, had no official record, no website, not even a business license, just a P.O. box in Mississippi and a generic voicemail. "How did we miss this?" Sandra asked aloud, more to herself than anyone else. How did the school miss this? The answer, Theo grimly admitted, was painfully simple. No one checked. Pierce had presented himself well, spoke softly, dressed neatly, and carried the aura of a benevolent excellent. He offered free time, free lessons, free rides. In a cash-strapped school district already stretched thin, no one looked deeper. Then Elijah remembered something from the folder, a flyer he had found, crumpled behind a bulletin board at a gas station in rural Arkansas. It advertised a summer program for exceptional youth ages 10-15, with promises of advanced learning environments, music conservatories, leadership training, and limited spots available by private referral only. He pulled the sheet from his folder and flattened it on the table. The logo in the bottom right corner matched exactly the one on a postcard Pierce had once given Terry, inviting him to a private talent retreat. Sandra snatched it from Elijah's hand. "That's it. That's what he gave us. He said Terry should apply, that they'd waive the fees if he was recommended by someone inside the program. I never sent the forms back, but I told him Terry was interested." "Jesus, I never told you I gave him our address." The weight of those words sank the room into silence. For years, Pierce had quietly inserted himself into the family's routine under the guise of mentorship. He had taught the boys, driven them home, watched their habits, and earned their trust. When Sandra was too busy working double shifts at the clinic, she had leaned on neighbors and trusted adults like Pierce without hesitation. And now, the revelation that he might not only have been complicit, but the very catalyst for their abduction, gutted her from the inside out. Theo began reaching out to others in town. At least 3 families remembered Pierce from youth community events, but none had heard from him in years. One recalled him mentioning a program in the Rockies. Another swore she saw him at a church fundraiser near Santa Fe. They compiled everything, school logs, flyers, interview transcripts, photographs, and submitted it to the regional FBI field office. But Theo wasn't content to wait. He uploaded an expose to his blog titled The Quiet Ones. How a small town to Predator in, within days, it was picked up by a regional news outlet, and suddenly phones were ringing. A former teacher from a middle school in Oklahoma sent in a grainy photo of her 2007 class piano recital. In the back, almost unnoticed, stood a man in a blazer, arms crossed, wearing a badge marked Guest Coordinator, M. Pierce. The school had lost a student that same month, A girl named Callie. Case still unsolved. Then came the breakthrough. A librarian at a public school in Albuquerque contacted Teo after seeing his article. She had been organizing old program booklets from their 2010 Youth Enrichment Fair when she noticed the name Michael R. Pierce listed as a representative for a group called Cedar Lantern Arts Collective. She scanned and sent over the entire pamphlet. The name, the timing, the logo, all matched. Cedar Lanterns, the same phrase Gwen had whispered in Houston. The same symbol children in New Mexico drew in crayon. The connection was no longer speculative. It was branded, documented, and systematic. Elijah stared at the pamphlet for a long time, his fingers brushing the name. He didn't just teach them music, he hunted through it. He found the ones who stood out, the quiet ones, the ones who wouldn't be missed right away, and he packaged them as talent so no one would question when they disappeared. Sandra's hands clenched into fists. He used my son's gift as a weapon. The rage that burned in her voice was different now, not just grief, but purpose. Naomi stood and opened the drawer where she had stored every piece of mail ever handed to her by the school. "If we go through all this again," she said, "we might find what else he left behind." The phone call came just past dawn, the kind of hour where everything feels unreal and time stretches like fog. Sandria was sitting in the kitchen, half asleep in her robe, a cup of untouched tea going cold on the table. Naomi was still upstairs. Elijah had spent the night on the couch again, files and newsprint scattered like leaves around his sleeping form. The ringtone was unfamiliar, an out-of-state number blinking on her cracked screen. She almost let it go to voicemail. But something, instinct or hope clawing its way up through grief, made her answer. "May Verney," a male voice said, cautious. "This is Officer Delgado from the Texas Highway Patrol. We believe we may have found your son." The world dropped from beneath her feet. For several seconds, she couldn't respond. She barely registered the details. A young man found wandering barefoot near the I-10 corridor outside of Van Horn, sunburned, dehydrated, malnourished, and mostly unresponsive. He had no ID, no wallet, nothing but a worn denim jacket and a broken analog wristwatch. Yellowed face, frayed straps, the kind that had to be wound manually. Sandra gripped the edge of the table. "What did he say?" Delgado hesitated. "Not much. He only gave a name. He said Malik." He repeated it once. Then he passed out. The drive to Texas blurred by in pieces, Sandra riding in the passenger seat of Naomi's old minivan, Elijah silent in the back seat, clutching a small notebook like a Bible. When they arrived at the hospital, a nurse met them at the front desk, her expression grim but not without kindness. "He's stable," she said, "still groggy. Some cognitive gaps, but alert. He hasn't said much more. There's trauma, likely long-term, but when we gave him a piano app on the tablet, just to keep him occupied, he started tapping out a melody. The same sequence, over and over." Sandra didn't breathe as she followed the nurse down the hall, through the antiseptic scent and fluorescent quiet of the hospital corridor. The room was small, dimly lit. Inside, a man, no longer a boy, sat curled on the bed, blanket draped over his lap, hands fidgeting with the tablet in front of him. He looked thin, almost breakable. His hair was uneven, skin pale and raw from exposure. But his eyes, those deep brown eyes, were unmistakable Malik's. When he looked up, she froze. "Mama?" he said, voice barely above a whisper. Her knees buckled. She crossed the room in 3 steps and held his face between trembling hands, searching for her son in the lines time had carved. "You came back," she breathed, eyes flooding. "I never stopped looking." Malik blinked slowly, like it took effort. The question sliced through the moment like glass. Sandra didn't answer. Instead, she held him tighter, unsure how to explain 20 years of unanswered prayers. Over the next few hours, doctors ran tests while Sandra and Elijah stayed by his side. Malik spoke in fragments, mostly yes or no answers, sometimes slipping into silence mid-sentence. He flinched at loud sounds. He didn't recognize mirrors, but every so often he'd hum. A melody Sandra knew well, one Tariq used to play on the old upright piano at Aunt Naomi's house. Simple, lyrical, repetitive. A song they had written together just before they disappeared. Tio arrived the following day with a USB drive in hand. "It's a shot in the dark," he said, "but I digitized the old recording of Tariq's birthday performance, the one Pierce filmed. Maybe it'll spark something." They played it softly on a speaker at Malik's bedside. At first he stared blankly at the ceiling, then, almost imperceptibly, his fingers began to twitch in rhythm with the notes. Sandra reached for his hand. "It's you, baby. That's you and Tariq." The second movement began, a shift to a minor key, the signature they had made together. Malik's lips parted, his brow furrowed, and then, with a sudden gasp, he sat upright, eyes wide. "Cedar?" he whispered. "Cedar lanterns." The room went silent. Elijah leaned forward, adrenaline surging. "What did you say?" Malik's voice cracked. "They called it that. The place. It had no real name, but the sign said Cedar Lanterns. We were there first." Sandra clutched his hand tighter. "Where is it? Do you remember?" Malik closed his eyes, pressing fingers to his temple. "Mountains. Cold. We couldn't see trees. But there were lights, hanging on the porch. Green one." He began trembling. "They burned the music. They said it was poison. But we kept playing it in our heads." Elijah scribbled everything down, nodding furiously. "It's real. Gwen said the same. She heard the name too. A retreat in Colorado. Maybe the Rockies. A camp without a name. They moved it around." As the pieces fell into place, Malik offered more. In his sleep, he muttered names. Tariq, of course, but others too. Jordan, Lucy, Sam. Names that matched other missing children Elijah had on file. Sometimes he'd flinch and say, "Don't open the red door," or "The man with the gloves is watching." Every recollection chipped away at the wall of fog that had consumed his memory. But the most chilling moment came during a late-night session when Elijah played the old melody again, this time slower, more mournful. Malik listened with eyes shut, lips trembling. When the final note faded, he whispered, "Tariq didn't leave. He stayed behind so we could go." Sandra froze. "What do you mean?" Malik opened his eyes, tears spilling. "He distracted them. He told me to run. I didn't want to, but he pushed me. He gave me the watch and closed the gate behind me." Sandra reached for the watch still on his wrist. It was the same one Tariq had worn, scuffed, sun-faded, still ticking faintly. Malik had kept it all these years, even through darkness and isolation. "They said he was broken," he whispered, "but he wasn't. He was just brave." Elijah stood and began organizing their files again. "We find Cedar Lanterns. We go back. If Malik made it out, maybe someone else did too." Sandra nodded slowly, a new fire in her chest. "And maybe Tarky's still alive." The revelations from Malik's broken memories had changed everything. What had long been a desperate hope now hardened into possibility. Tariq had been alive, at least for a time after the escape, and more than that, he had made a choice. He had stayed behind not because he was captured or left behind in chaos, but because he had chosen to buy time for the others. Sandra sat in silence on the ride back from the hospital, holding Malik's jacket in her lap, fingers brushing over the seams like prayer beads. She kept replaying the words over and over. "He pushed me. He closed the gate. He gave me the watch." Elijah, seated beside her, was already scanning satellite maps of remote Colorado camps, drawing routes, cross-referencing files, charting escape patterns like a man possessed. Malik, still recovering, spent hours sketching diagrams of the compound, floor plans etched from memory, details flooding back like slow-rising water. He described narrow hallways, an underground cellar with cement floors, green lanterns swaying in the breeze. But there was one room he mentioned repeatedly, a large space with a statue in the center, made of dull plaster, shaped like a man holding a book. "That was the church room," he said, "where they took us when we were bad. The man with the gloves would sit in the corner. And there was a camera, always a camera, now rang like a curse and a promise. With help from Theo, lanterns now rang like a curse and a promise. With help from Theo's, what shifted their stance wasn't just the evidence, but something tangible, something found in an evidence locker from a previously unrelated case in southern Utah. In early 2026, 2 hikers had stumbled upon an abandoned cabin near Pagosa Springs. Inside they found strange remains, melted candles, torn blankets, and a cracked statue of a man holding a book, its face chipped away, hollow at the base. Inside the base, tucked in a small compartment wrapped in wax paper and sealed in plastic, was a camcorder. It had been catalogued and shelved for months, marked as a possible cult artifact, never linked to any specific crime. But once the FBI tied the symbol on the statue's base, a faded T+M, to the Rivers case, the tape inside became a priority. Sandra, Elijah, Malik, and a handful of agents sat in a secure viewing room while a tech loaded the footage into a monitor. The screen flickered, colors washed out, time-stamped missing. Then the frame steadied. Tariq's face appeared. He looked older than Sandra remembered, but still so unmistakably her son. His hair was shorter, unevenly trimmed, and his face bore thin scratches, but his eyes, intense, clear, burning with conviction, held everything. "If you're seeing this," he said, voice steady but tired, "then maybe it means someone made it out. Maybe Malik is safe. Maybe the others too. I'm not sure how much time I have, so I'll be quick." He glanced behind him, toward a door just off in the cellar. "They think I'm broken now, quiet, obedient, but I've been watching. I know how they move, how they rotate the groups, how they hide the paperwork. I know what they call this place. I know what they are." He paused, breathing hard. "There are kids here, not just me and Malik, dozens. Some talk anymore, some don't even remember their real names. But they're alive, and they deserve to be found." He raised his hand and held up the old yellow wristwatch. "I gave this to Malik, told him to run when the alarm rang. I think he made it. I hope he did. If this video is found, don't waste time. They move locations every 3 months. Burn everything. Rebuild elsewhere. They leave behind only the statues." Sandra choked on a sob. Elijah leaned forward, fists clenched. Malik sat frozen, tears pooling without movement. On screen, Tariq's voice cracked for the first time. "I wanted to go with him, but if I did, they would have followed, so I stayed. I locked the cellar. I told them I was sick, that I'd been poisoned by the others. That way, they quarantined me, and the rest got a head start. I hope it was enough." He shifted the camera briefly, showing a dark hallway behind him, flickering lights, the curve of a stairwell. Then he faced the lens again, a forced smile twitching on his lips. "Tell Mom I love her. Tell her we didn't give up, that we fought, that we were strong." A noise echoed in the background, a door creaking open. Tariq turned suddenly, eyes wide. "I have to go," he whispered. "Turn this inside the statue's base. They won't look there, they never do. Please find us." The tape cut to static. The room sat in silence long after the screen went black. Malik exhaled a single broken word. He stayed. Sandra stood, walked to the screen, and placed her hand against Tariq's frozen face. "He saved them," she whispered. "He saved you." The FBI, galvanized by the recordings, analyzed satellite photos, and followed former Cedar Lanterns associates. Elijah returned to his maps, redrawing paths with Tariq's voice in his ears. Theo published a new article titled "The Boy Who Stayed Behind," and within 48 hours, anonymous tips began flooding his inbox. Whispers of hidden camps, sightings of green lanterns, and statues found in burned-out chapels. Sandra, meanwhile, focused on Malik. Every time she saw him trace the scar along his wrist or flinch at flickering lights, she reminded him, "You got out, you got away, because he gave you that chance." Malik nodded, but something remained unfinished in his eyes. At night, he'd sit alone at Naomi's old piano, playing the same melody, waiting for the note that might bring Tariq back. Tariq's video, once stabilized and examined frame by a digital forensics team, revealed more than just his voice and bravery. It revealed coordinates. Hidden in a corner of the frame, etched crudely into the cement wall behind him and visible only under infrared light, was a string of numbers. At first they looked random, meaningless, but a field agent recognized the format and cross-referenced it with an abandoned property registry maintained by the Bureau of Land Management. The location pointed to a remote plot of land in eastern Colorado, near the base of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. No official structures were listed, but satellite images showed signs of irregular footpaths, several low-roof buildings, and a series of artificial clearings. When Sandra was told, she didn't speak. She simply nodded and packed a bag. "He remembers enough," Sandra said firmly, "and if he sees it, maybe more will come back." The FBI moved in with a specialized unit under the veil of night, using unmarked vehicles and infrared drones. The clearing they entered had the eerie quiet of a forgotten sanctuary, overgrown trails, wild grass reclaiming gravel paths, and at the center a decaying chapel-like building with boarded windows and green lanterns still hanging on rusted hooks. Inside the structure, agents found the remains of cots, plastic bins of uniforms labeled with numbers instead of names, a broken piano, and in the basement, 5 children. They were emaciated but alive, 2 girls, 3 boys, ranging from ages 8 to 16. None of them had ID. None remembered their full names, but one girl whispered the word harvest again and again, even in her sleep. Malik froze when he saw the cellar's stone walls. His fingers reached out instinctively to touch the chipped paint, the deep grooves scratched into the corners, initials, names, warnings. "I did this," he said, voice shaking. "This is where we waited, where we hid." Sandra held him tighter, heart in her throat. One of the rescued boys, a pale, sharp-boned 13-year-old, looked at Malik with wide eyes. "You're the one who ran. You're the one he helped." Malik turned. "Who?" The old boy pointed toward the center wall, where a chalk mural remained half visible, 2 stick figures with matching watches, one pointing toward an exit, the other standing still. "The older one. He said we'd be free." Elijah, reviewing files in the FBI command tent, connected dots faster than ever before. The name Harvest wasn't new. It had appeared in fringe articles, conspiracy forums, and old church registries across the Midwest since the late 90s. Always affiliated with lost children, always tied to mysterious wellness camps and traveling revivals. What hadn't been clear until now was the network behind it. Using data from the GPS logs recovered from a surviving hard drive on site, agents traced a digital breadcrumb trail to a series of shell organizations, front-funding nonprofits, religious reform groups, and community mentorship programs, each registered under a different name, but all transferring funds to one central holding group under the name Harvest Fellowship Trust. That trust had been quietly collecting donations, purchasing property, and shuffling volunteers under vague titles like soul caretakers and youth shepherds for over 2 decades. FBI analysts compiled a list of 76 former children connected to Harvest-affiliated programs between 1998 and 2021, who were now missing, presumed dead, or never formally reported. Dozens of these cases had been marked as runaways. Others had been quietly closed for lack of evidence. The deeper they dug, the more horrifying the pattern became. The Harvest wasn't a cult in the traditional sense. It was a network designed to exploit spiritual language to isolate and indoctrinate children, breaking their identities to rebuild them as pliable, silent workers. Some were placed into labor camps disguised as summer programs. Others were adopted into off-the-books foster situations across state lines. All were stripped of their names. Only a few ever made it back. In the Colorado compound, behind a false wall in the basement, agents uncovered a locked trunk containing journals, VHS tapes, and a binder labeled Redemption Rotation. Inside were records, meticulously kept logs of child movements, names crossed out in red, with some marked cleans and others recycled. The language was sanitized, bureaucrat, chilling. Sandra read through a page and nearly collapsed. Malik's name appeared in the 2006 ledger. Tariq's too. Beside Malik's was the word loyal. Beside Tariq's, unbroken. A list of coordinators was appended at the back of the binder. One name stood out, Michael Pierce. His role, shepherd, rank to acquisition. His assignments spanned 6 states. The proof was no longer circumstantial. It was operational. As news of the raid broke, media outlets disbanded. Theo, first to publish the true scope of the Harvest, was flooded with interviews. Families began contacting him, mothers, fathers, siblings who had long been dismissed or disbelieved. A nationwide inquiry was launched, and a special task force formed to identify other Harvest sites. Yet even as agents spread out, Sandra couldn't focus on statistics or headlines. She kept her eyes on the horizon, on the image of Tariq in her mind. young, brave, never surrendering. The rescued children began to speak, slowly, through therapy and art. One girl drew a figure she called the brother who sang. Another described hiding inside a closet with a boy who counted the days by etching marks into a wooden beam. Malik confirmed every story. He stayed in the light so we could run through the dark, he said, his voice firm now, no longer shaking. When shown pictures of possible sites connected to Harvest, Malik pointed to one, a weather-worn building in Idaho. "That's where they took him last," he said. "That's where the shepherd said he'd be cleansed. But I don't think they ever did. I think he outsmarted them, like always." Elijah turned toward Sandra. "If he's alive, we can find him." Sandra nodded, and for the first time in years, her reply didn't sound like a question. The more Malik remembered, the clearer the image became, not of a broken boy lost to time, but of someone still very much alive, trapped in a different kind of prison. The memories came at night, always disjointed, always painful, but sharper now than before. He saw flashes of Tariq, older, thinner, his face drawn and still, his eyes distant, or the first flame. Malik told Sandra and Elijah, "They didn't kill him. They repurposed him. The realization sickened him. They made him into something else, not just a prisoner, a tool." Deo, now embedded with the FBI task force as a civilian documentarian, compiled the emerging testimonies and found a repeated phrase in multiple survivor accounts. The guardian at the cross. Some children described a man who never spoke but watched over the dorms at night, standing in doorways like a statue. He wore white robes in ceremonial gatherings and was seen lighting green lanterns during. His name was never spoken, but the children said he always paused when he heard the name Malik. The field agents focused on the last known Harvest-affiliated site still unaccounted for, a secluded estate in the Bitterroot Range of Montana listed under a shell charity named Northern Flame Ministries. The estate, guarded by a single unmarked dirt road and a helipad. Satellite images showed an odd structure, circular in layout, with a central tower, dormitories radiating outward like spokes, and what appeared to be a chapel inlaid with glass mosaics. The FBI prepared for a high-risk raid. Tactical units trained in child rescue protocols were flown in. On a cold October morning just before dawn, black helicopters swept low across the tree line and touched down without warning. What they found stunned even the most seasoned agents. The children, 23 of them, were housed in meticulously maintained dorms, silent, structured, dressed in pale gray. No cries, no confusion, just eerie obedience. They didn't flinch when approached, they simply waited. In the chapel, under a stained glass skylight, stood a man in white. He turned slowly as the agents entered, hands raised, unarmed. He didn't speak, but one of the agents, noting the necklace he wore, an aged metal pendant shaped like a T intersecting an RA, signaled for identification. They took him in without resistance. He gave no name, only looked around as if searching for something missing. Sandra, Malik, and Elijah were called to Montana within 24 hours. When Sandra entered the observation room at the detention center, she felt her knees buckle. Behind the one-way glass, seated at a plain metal table, was her son. Tariq, 34 now, skin pale, hair trimmed close, posture rigid like a soldier in a forgotten army. His eyes were open, alert but vacant. Malik stood beside her, breath caught in his throat. "That's him," he whispered, "but he's not all the way here." The deprogramming began immediately. Trauma experts, memory specialists, and cult exit counselors worked in rotating shifts. At first, Tariq didn't respond to questions. He recited phrases from the Harvest Doctrine, "Children of Ash, true light, the voice is silence, and the silence is obedience." But when Malik was allowed to speak through the intercom, everything shifted. He didn't use therapy words. He used memories. "Do you remember the gumbo from Aunt Naomi's birthday?" Malik asked one evening. "You burned your tongue because you couldn't wait." No response. "Do you remember when you painted your shoelaces yellow because you thought they looked faster?" A flicker. His fingers twitched. "Do you remember the song?" Malik hummed softly, just a few notes. A chord progression, simple but specific. Terry's gaze lifted. He blinked. For a split second, the tension in his shoulders released. It wasn't immediate, it wasn't even linear, but over the course of weeks the cracks spread through the persona the harvest had built. Tariq began responding in monosyllables, then in phrases. One night, when Malik was visiting and strumming chords on a borrowed guitar, Tariq whispered, "You kept the watch?" Malik held it up. "I never took it off." Tears welled in Tariq's eyes, the first anyone had seen. He nodded slowly. "You got out." Malik stepped closer to the glass. "And now you did too." The FBI officially declared the Montana estate the final known site of active harvest operations. Hundreds of documents were recovered, including a ledger confirming what Elijah had feared. Pierce had been operating under 6 different identities, last seen near the Idaho border. Arrest warrants were issued. Esther judges were finally allowed to sit across from her eldest son. No barrier, no glass, just space, time, and 1,000 words left unsaid. She reached for his hand. He flinched at first, then allowed it. "I missed you," she said, "every single day." Tariq looked at her, something behind his eyes beginning to shift. "I tried to keep them safe," he said. "You did," she replied, voice breaking. "You gave us everything. Now let us give you something back." Recovery wasn't cinematic. It didn't arrive in a triumphant swell or a singular moment of clarity. It came in small, fragile pieces, Tariq lifting his gaze when Sandra entered the room, recognizing the smell of Aunt Naomi's lavender soap, asking for Malak called it music that music. Malak called it music. Every evening he brought his guitar or a borrowed keyboard and played the same melody, the one they had written together when they were 13, before everything shattered. At first Tariq just listened, fingers twitching to rhythms buried beneath layers of indoctrination. Then he began to hum along, barely audible, and one afternoon, without warning, he reached out and played 3 notes in sequence. The notes weren't perfect. His hand trembled, but it was enough. Malik stopped playing, heart pounding. "You remember?" Tariq didn't answer. He simply played the 4th note, the one Malik always forgot. That night, Sandra cooked gumbo for the first time in 2 decades. The scent filled the rented apartment they had moved into in Denver, where the FBI's Trauma Recovery Unit had set them up temporarily. Malik set the table. Naomi FaceTimed in from St. Clair. Tariq sat quietly, but didn't retreat when Sandra kissed the top of his head. He whispered, "You still use too much pepper?" She laughed through tears and nodded. "And you still don't finish your okra." In the months that followed, Tari underwent intensive therapy, both clinical and emotional. He journaled, worked with neurologists, joined group sessions with other survivors, but nothing compared to the nights he spent on the porch with Malik, just talking, remembering, healing. They spoke of childhood, the creek behind Naomi's house, the time they built a tree fort that collapsed after 5 minutes, the week they tried to raise a stray kitten who turned out to be a raccoon. The memories didn't just return. They reattached, gave him back his name, his story, his center. He no longer flinched when someone said, "Harvest." He no longer whispered mantras in his sleep. He woke up with breath instead of panic. Tariq didn't want to hide. He wanted to speak, but not through headlines or news cameras. Instead, he and Malik began designing something tangible, a nonprofit aimed at tracking, rescuing, and rehabilitating lost children, especially those manipulated through spiritual or cultic means. They named it Tariq's Light, not as a symbol of ego, but because that's what Malik said he had become. A light in the dark when everyone else had been afraid. Sandra helped file the paperwork. Theo donated the first check. Elijah, having completed his own investigation files, joined as an advisor. The organization partnered with survivor networks, FBI outreach programs, and schools. Within a year, they had recovered 3 runaways, exposed 2 false foster agencies, and helped dozens of families find the truth. But it wasn't just about saving the living. It was also about honoring the lost. In the heart of St. Clair, where it all began, the City Council approved a proposal Sandra submitted under quiet anonymity. A memorial garden built on the lot where the community center used to stand. The garden wouldn't bear the names of donors or politicians. Instead, it would have a bronze sculpture, 2 boys, hand in hand, walking toward a horizon cast in steel and glass. One boy looked back, his face turned toward the past. The others stepped forward, leading the way. Beneath them, carved in clean lines, were the words, "For those who stayed, for those who made it home, and for those still in the dark, we carry your light." On the day of the unveiling, a gentle spring breeze moved through the trees. Dozens gathered, quietly, reverently. Survivors, mothers, police officers, neighbors who had once watched Sandra's search alone. Now she stood beside both her sons. Malik wore a dark suit, Tariq wore a simple button-down shirt and the yellow watch, now restored and ticking. As the cloth lifted from the statue, the crowd fell silent. Then someone began to hum. A melody, faint, familiar. Malik picked it up on guitar. Tariq joined with keys, tapping a portable piano set beside the podium. The tune filled the garden, not mournful, not triumphant, but whole. Afterward, a little girl approached Tariq. She had heard his story. She had been taken once too, though not for long. She looked up at him with wide eyes and asked. He knelt beside her. "I was," he said softly, "but now I walk forward." She nodded and took his hand. That evening, the family returned home. Sandra lit 3 candles on the porch, one for each of them, one for all the names they would never forget. Malik placed a photo inside a new frame, 2 boys smiling in school uniforms, arms around each other, unaware of the darkness to come. Above it, in marker, he wrote, "Still brothers, still here, still light." And this time, when the porch light came on, it wasn't waiting. It was welcoming. If this story moved you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more true inspired narratives like this one. We'd love to hear your thoughts. What detail shocked you the most? And where in the world are you watching from? Drop a comment below and let's talk about it.